I've spent the past decade working tirelessly to pay off this house. It's a modest 3-bedroom, nothing fancy, just a place I can truly call my own. The sense of accomplishment every time I walk through the door is priceless. No designer decor or sprawling backyard, but it's comfortable, quiet, and most importantly, mine. That's where my sister, Carrie, comes in. She's 31, married to Blake, 32, and they're the quintessential free spirits. The type of couple that scoffs at the grind, rejecting 9-to-5 jobs to live life to the fullest. Honestly, I always admired their adventurous outlook to some degree, but I also found it exhausting. Over the years, their plans became grander, and I assumed their lofty dreams would stay as that, dreams. Then they went for it. They sold their house, the very home their 2 kids, Ava, 7, and Liam, 5, had grown up in, to fund a year of globe-trotting. The housing market was booming, and they figured they'd cash in big. Their plan was simple: live off the profits, pick up odd jobs, and stretch their budget while gallivanting across continents. I watched all this unfold from my little haven, shaking my head. Traveling the world with kids isn't the same as carefree backpacking. Yet Carrie and Blake brushed off my concerns, certain they'd figure it out. I decided to stay out of it. After all, it wasn't my life. Fast forward a couple of months, and my phone rings. It's Carrie. At first, I think she's calling to brag about their adventures, but when I pick up, her tone surprises me. She's stressed, more stressed than I've ever heard her. It turns out they'd burned through their savings in record time. Between fancy stays, eating out, and generally living it up, the money was gone. Just like that. And now they needed help. So there I was, sitting in my cozy living room, halfway through a rerun of some crime drama, when Carrie's call came in. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a quick update, or another one of her Instagram-worthy tales about life on the road. Instead, the moment I picked up, I could tell something was off. "Hey, it's me," she started, her voice tight. "We, need to talk. Here's the thing. Carrie doesn't do 'we need to talk' unless it's something serious." So I sat up, muting the TV, bracing for whatever was coming. She launched into a whirlwind explanation of how everything went sideways. Turns out, globe-trotting with 2 kids wasn't as glamorous as their Instagram posts made it look. They underestimated just how expensive living the dream could be. The hostels and Airbnbs weren't as cheap as they'd hoped, especially when the kids couldn't just go with the flow. Kids need structure, real meals, and proper beds, not to mention endless snacks and random toys to keep them sane. In less than 2 months, the savings they'd banked on lasting a year were gone. Now they were stuck, unable to keep traveling, but also unwilling to settle down and buy another house. And that's when she hit me with it. "We were wondering if we could stay with you for a bit," she said, her words spilling out like she was trying to say it before I could react. "Just for a while, you know. Maybe 10 months? Just until we figure things out." I nearly dropped the phone. 10 months, that's not a while, that's nearly a year. And it wasn't just her and Blake, they wanted to bring the kids too. 4 people crammed into my 3-bedroom house. And here's the kicker, they weren't planning to pay rent. Nope. Carrie went on to explain that they were still recovering financially and needed a place to regroup, rent-free. I'll admit, I was stunned for a moment. My sister, who'd made this wild decision to uproot her life without a safety net, now expected me to swoop in and bail them out. I care about her, I really do. But this was a lot to ask. I tried to tread lightly, offering alternatives instead of outright rejection. "Carrie, look, I get that you're in a tough spot, but I don't think this will work. The house is small, and I've got my own routine. But hey, I can help you find a rental nearby, or even chip in for a deposit to get you started." She didn't take it well. Her voice sharpened like a knife. "Wow, so that's it? You won't even consider it?" "We're family, Ethan. Family is supposed to help each other." That's when it started to sink in. This wasn't just a casual request. She really thought she was entitled to move in, to take over my space. And when I didn't immediately cave, she got defensive. accusing me of being selfish. "I'm not selfish, Carrie," I said firmly, trying to keep my temper in check. "You made a choice, a reckless one. It's not fair to expect me to rearrange my life because of it." She huffed, clearly unimpressed, and hung up. I sat there for a while, staring at the silent phone, wondering if I'd been too harsh. But deep down, I knew I wasn't in the wrong. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. I figured that after I turned her down, Carrie would take some time to cool off. Maybe, just maybe, she'd realize I wasn't being unreasonable. But if there's one thing I should have known about my sister, it's that she doesn't give up that easily. A week later, I found out just how far she was willing to push this. It started innocently enough, a knock at my door on a quiet Saturday morning. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened it with my coffee still in hand. And there they were, Carrie, Blake, and the kids, standing on my porch with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "Oh, hey," I said, caught off guard. "What's up?" Carrie jumped right into small talk, asking how work was going, how I'd been. But the tension was palpable. I knew they weren't there for a casual visit. After a few awkward minutes, Blake cleared his throat. "We've been thinking about what you said on the phone," he started, and then Carrie took over, her voice sugary sweet, but clearly rehearsed. "We know you're worried about space and everything, but we've got it all figured out," she said, clasping her hands in front of her like she was pitching me a great idea. "It's only for 10 months. We'll stay out of your way, keep everything clean, and the kids will be so quiet you won't even notice us." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "Carrie, I already told you. I don't think it's a good idea." That's when Blake chimed in, his tone more assertive. "We're desperate, Ethan. Rentals around here are too expensive, and we've got nowhere else to go. You have the space. We just need a little help." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my frustration in check. "I get that you're in a tough spot, I do, but this house isn't set up for 4 extra people. And honestly, I need my space. I'm happy to help in other ways, but this just isn't going to work." Carrie's smile dropped in an instant, replaced by that all-too-familiar scowl. "Are you serious right now? You're really going to turn your back on us? We're family, Ethan. Family helps each other." My patience was wearing thin. Family also respects boundaries. I worked hard for this house, and I'm not going to let you uproot my life because you didn't think this through. Her voice rose, anger bubbling over. "You think this is what we wanted? You think we enjoy begging for help? We don't have any other options." Blake tried to play the peacemaker, stepping in with a softer approach. "Look, man, we'll pitch in, cook meals, do chores, whatever you need. We won't be a burden." I shook my head. "It's not about that. It's about me needing my own space. This isn't just a quick favor. You're asking for 10 months of my life. I can't do it." Carrie's face turned red, and her voice cracked with frustration. "I can't believe how selfish you're being. You're just sitting here in this big house all alone, while your family is struggling." Her words stung, but I didn't budge. "Selfish would be letting you move in when I know it's going to make everyone miserable. I'm not the bad guy here. You made choices, Carrie, and now you're dealing with the consequences." The argument spiraled from there. By the end, both of them were yelling. The kids were crying, and I was standing firm in my doorway, refusing to give in. Finally, Carrie threw up her hands and stormed off, muttering something about how they'd figure it out without my help. Blake followed behind her, his glare burning into me like I was the devil himself. I watched them drive away, my stomach churning. I felt like the bad guy, even though I knew I wasn't in the wrong. I'd set a boundary and stuck to it. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling this wasn't the end of it, and I was right. The real fallout was only just beginning. I thought after that heated showdown on my doorstep, things might finally settle down. Maybe Carrie and Blake would come to their senses, realize they needed to figure this out on their own. But no, if anything, the chaos only ramped up from there. It started with a call from my mom. Now, normally, mom's calls are about harmless stuff, like how I should be eating more vegetables, or if I've met someone nice yet. This time, though, her tone was different, serious and disappointed. "Ethan, I just don't understand," she said. "Why wouldn't you help your sister? You know how hard things are for her right now." I sighed, already exhausted before the conversation even began. "Mom, I offered to help. I told her I'd pitch in for a rental or help them get on their feet. But letting them live here for 10 months, that's too much. I can't do it." She didn't let up. "But you have the space, and their family. Isn't that what family does? Help each other in tough times?" "Family also respects boundaries, Mom," I shot back, trying to keep my voice calm. "This isn't about me being selfish. Carrie and Blake made a choice to sell their house and blow through their savings. I'm not responsible for cleaning up their mess." But it was like she wasn't even listening. She kept going on about how I didn't understand what it was like to be in their position, how I was being cold-hearted, how a little inconvenience wouldn't kill me. "It's not a little inconvenience, Mom," I finally said, my frustration boiling over. "It's 4 people in my house for almost a year, rent-free. That's a huge ask. I've worked hard for this home, and I'm not about to let them take over my space just because they didn't plan ahead." She didn't like that answer, not one bit. The disappointment in her voice was clear as she muttered, "I thought you were better than this, Ethan." That stung. But before I could even process it, my dad called the next day, and his approach was different. He wasn't guilt-tripping me like Mom. No, he went straight for the tough love lecture. "You're being selfish, Ethan," he said bluntly. "Carrie's always been the one willing to take risks, to live life. And you've just stayed in your safe little bubble. You don't get it." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Safe little bubble? Dad, I've spent the last 10 years working my ass off to pay for this house. That's not a bubble. That's responsibility. He didn't back down. "And what's responsibility if you can't even help your own family when they need you? You've got the means, Ethan. You're just choosing not to step up." That hit a nerve. "This isn't about stepping up," I snapped. "It's about boundaries. I'm not sacrificing my peace, my home, and my sanity because Carrie and Blake didn't think things through. They need to take responsibility for their own choices. End of story." But of course, it wasn't the end, because Carrie wasn't done stirring the pot. A couple of days later, I woke up to a flurry of notifications on my phone. Turns out, she'd taken the drama to Facebook. There it was, a long emotional post about how her family was struggling and how some people who could have helped had turned their backs on her. She didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who she was talking about. And the comments, oh, they were a disaster. People were eating it up, chiming in about how heartless it was to abandon family in need. Extended relatives, folks I hadn't spoken to in years, were piling on, calling me selfish, saying they always knew I was like this. My aunt even wrote, "It's so sad when someone values their possessions more than their family." I couldn't believe it. These people didn't know half the story. They weren't there when I offered to help in other ways. They weren't the ones being asked to give up their home for nearly a year. But somehow, I was the villain. At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured it wasn't worth engaging. But as the day went on, and the notifications kept rolling in, I couldn't stay silent. If Carrie was going to drag me through the mud publicly, I had to set the record straight. So, I wrote my own post. It wasn't as dramatic as hers, just the plain truth. I explained how I'd offered to help in other ways, how Carrie and Blake had refused anything but free rent in my home for 10 months. I laid it all out, including how they'd blown through their money without a backup plan. The response was mixed. Some people backed me up, saying I had every right to set boundaries, but others, they doubled down, accusing me of being too harsh, of abandoning my sister when she needed me most. Carrie, of course, saw the post and exploded. She sent me a string of angry texts, calling me every name in the book. Selfish, arrogant, heartless. She even accused me of destroying the family by airing our dirty laundry online, completely ignoring the fact that she'd started it. Eventually, she blocked me. And honestly, that was fine by me. At least it meant I wouldn't have to deal with her constant guilt tripping anymore. But even with her out of the picture, the damage was done. The family was split down the middle, and the drama was far from over. After Carrie blocked me and the dust settled from our Facebook fallout, I thought things might finally start to quiet down. But I underestimated just how much staying firm on this boundary was going to cost me. The family tension didn't just simmer, it boiled over. The first sign, my dad called again. His tone wasn't angry this time, but something about it was worse: disappointment. That low, heavy voice he used when he thought I'd really screwed up. I saw the posts, Ethan, he began. What were you thinking? Taking this family drama public like that? Now everyone's involved. I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. Dad, I didn't start this. Carrie did. She made it public first, and I had to defend myself. What was I supposed to do? Let everyone think I'm some heartless villain? His sigh on the other end of the line was deep and heavy. You could have just let it go, handled it privately. But now, look at where we are. The family's divided. Your sister's hurt. And for what? To prove a point? That hit a nerve. To prove a point, I snapped. No, Dad, this isn't about proving a point. It's about standing up for myself. Carrie and Blake made reckless decisions, and now they expect me to clean up their mess. I offered to help in reasonable ways, but that wasn't good enough. What else am I supposed to do? Let them take over my house for nearly a year while they figure out how to fix their own lives? He didn't have an answer for that. He just sighed again and said, I hope you know what you're doing, Ethan, because this family might not recover from this. The weight of his words hung over me long after he hung up. Was I breaking the family apart by refusing to bend? The guilt started creeping in again, that gnawing feeling that maybe I was being too harsh. But every time I replayed the situation in my head, I came to the same conclusion. I wasn't in the wrong. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. But the fallout kept coming. A few days later, I got a text from a mutual friend of ours, Tom. He's a decent guy, usually pretty level-headed, but even he seemed to be swept up in the narrative Carrie had spun. Hey man, I heard about the situation, he wrote. I get where you're coming from, but it's just 10 months, right? Couldn't you tough it out for family? I stared at the screen, frustration bubbling up all over again. It wasn't just 10 months. It was my life, my peace, my home. I typed back, trying to keep my tone calm but firm, explaining again why I couldn't do it. Tom didn't push after that, but his silence spoke volumes. Even he thought I was in the wrong. And then came the final twist. One evening, just as I was starting to think the drama might die down, I got another knock on my door. When I opened it, there was Carrie, standing alone this time. No Blake, no kids, just her. Her face was red, and her eyes looked puffy like she'd been crying. For a second, I thought maybe she was there to apologize, to call a truce. But then she spoke. You win, Ethan, she said bitterly. We're moving in with Blake's parents. It's not ideal, but at least they're willing to help us. I didn't know what to say. Part of me was relieved. Finally, the pressure was off. But another part of me felt like I'd just lost something important. Not my house or my space, but a piece of my relationship with my sister. I never wanted it to come to this, I said softly. I just needed you to understand where I was coming from. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes again. No, Ethan, you needed to prove that you were right. And now you've got it. Congratulations. With that, she turned and walked away. I closed the door and stood there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in around me. I'd won the argument, sure, but it didn't feel like a victory. In the weeks that followed, things remained tense. Carrie didn't speak to me, and my parents kept their distance. Family gatherings were awkward, filled with polite smiles and conversations that tiptoed around the elephant in the room. But through it all, I held firm to one truth. I wasn't in the wrong. Carrie and Blake made choices that had consequences, and it wasn't my job to save them from those consequences. I'd offered help in ways I could manage, ways that wouldn't disrupt my own life, but they wanted more, and I couldn't give it. Setting boundaries is hard, it's messy, and sometimes it comes with a cost. But I've learned that my peace is worth fighting for, even when the world, or your family, makes you feel like you're the bad guy for wanting it. Story 2. Hello everyone, I need your assistance before we begin today's video. One of the best ways you can help us out is to subscribe. As we've observed, the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is greatly appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello Reddit. I never imagined that I would be posting here, but what happened 2 weeks ago is making me completely insane. I need to express it publicly to see whether I'm exaggerating or if this whole thing is as crazy as it seems. It's been eating away at me. It's going to be a doozy, so be ready. To set the scene, a little background. Tom, my 31-year-old husband, and I, a 28-year-old woman, recently had Lily, our first child. Although she is flawless, her entrance was not at all what I had anticipated. It became a complete nightmare, and the people involved, rather than the enchanted, tearful occasion I had hoped about. Margaret, my mother-in-law, and Vanessa, my sister-in-law. You know, the type of folks who make you wonder if karma is real. 2 weeks ago, Vanessa tied the knot. Her age is 27, extremely self-centered, and married Tom's best friend Greg. It was okay when I accepted to be a bridesmaid, which was about a year ago. However, I was 9 months pregnant by the time of the wedding, like waddling all around. I can't see my feet, might give birth at any moment. Pregnant, sort of. I decided it was the appropriate thing to do and graciously retracted my offer to be a bridesmaid months in advance. Vanessa, she was unhappy, I see. Although she didn't say it directly, she made sure I could clearly sense the passive-aggressive feelings. Comments such as, "I wish everyone cared as much as I do about my big day. Being pregnant is not a reason to disappoint others." I made an effort to let things go. Margaret was no better, telling me over and over again to put in more effort because marriage is a one-time event. It seems that being in labor is not a valid excuse for missing work. I chose to attend the wedding in spite of everything. Tom was adamant that we come. A part of me wondered if I was overanalyzing this. Let's simply get through it together and support Vanessa. A huge error, enormous. The event took place in this lovely outdoor setting. Beautiful, isn't it? In addition, it was about 90 degrees. In addition, I was perspiring profusely because, well, walking and being 9 months pregnant don't mix. I had to keep stopping to collect my breath. I was already regretting my choice by the time we arrived. However, I forced a pleasant grin and made an effort to remain composed. Then everything took a turn for the worst. I had a searing pain right before the ceremony began. That was so intense, it made me freeze. "Something's happening," I muttered as I leaned over to Tom. He gave me a look as if I had just told him that aliens had landed. Hoping I was simply dehydrated or anything, I excused myself to the closest restroom. Not at all. That's where my water broke. Officially, I was in labor. I was in a panic at that moment. What exactly do you do in that circumstance, really? I sent Tom a text asking him to come upstairs. But guess who was the first to find me? Margaret. I pleaded with her to get Tom and told her what had happened. "Margaret, please, I'm giving birth. Get Tom right away." I grabbed the sink for support as I gasped. She glared at me like I was some sort of bother as she stood there with her arms crossed. "You're not leaving," she stated icily. "Vanessa's wedding won't be ruined by you. Are you listening to me, Wreck-It? I am expecting a child." She did not recoil when I shot back. Rather, she moved in the direction of the door. "Remain here till it's over," she said. "You'll be fine," then locked the door and turned to leave. I assumed she was kidding. For example, who would say such to a woman who is in labor? She was dead serious, though. She went on to say that Vanessa had been under enough stress without my causing a scene, and that if I couldn't handle it, I should have stayed at home. I was unable to even reply. This woman was behaving as though I had just admitted to burning the wedding cake, even though I was in excruciating pain. Then the unimaginable occurred. I was confined in the bathroom by Margaret. It wasn't until I heard the door click that I realized what was happening. Something along the lines of, "Stay here until it's over," she said. "You'll be all right." Then she took my phone and left. I went crazy. I began yelling for assistance and banging on the door. However, everyone was downstairs, and the music had already begun. I won't tell lies, I was afraid. I was trapped in a freaking restroom with no way out, and my contractions were becoming worse. At my sister-in-law's wedding, I recall asking myself, is this really how I'm going to have my baby locked in a bathroom? Because of the psychopathy of my mother-in-law, the entire event remains a haze. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed, so I must have fainted from the pain at some point. I started crying as soon as I saw Tom carrying our kid. Seeing them both made me happy, but I was also incensed. How had it come to this? Whoever harms another person, much less a member of their family? Panic struck when the initial shock subsided. I was in labor, of course, but I had no idea how far along I was. I couldn't precisely time the contractions without my phone because they were coming quickly. I yelled loudly and continued to knock on the door, but nobody answered. Downstairs, I could hear some faint music. There was something classical that sounded lovely to everyone else, but to me, it felt like the end of the world. I sat on the chilly tile floor for a while, crying and hoping that someone would notice that I was gone. I made an effort to remain composed, but when you're terrified, it's difficult to think clearly. And in that much agony, I recall attempting to breathe through the contractions while holding on to the sink's edge. I had the impression that the cosmos was cruelly mocking me. I eventually resumed my ranting since I was so desperate for someone to listen. Nothing happened when I screamed for Tom. Even though I now realize it was probably less than that, it felt like hours. Downstairs, Tom informed me later that everything was starting as if nothing had occurred. Margaret had seemingly reverted to her role as the bride's devoted mother, and Vanessa was doing her entire slow stroll down the aisle thing. Until the ceremony ended and Tom realized I hadn't returned to my place. No one recognized I was gone. He sent me a few texts, but received no reply. He began asking around at that point in an attempt to find out where I went. Margaret. She dismissed him after telling him that I wanted some alone time. I didn't buy it, Tom said. He is aware that I wouldn't simply disappear. He therefore began searching for me while the others were chatting and snapping photos. He inspected the automobile, the parking lot, and the restrooms downstairs. Nothing. At last, he made the decision to inspect the restrooms upstairs. He claimed to have heard me yelling as soon as he approached. The door was locked when he tried it. He realized then that there was a significant problem. Tom began shouting my name and hammering on the door. I can't even recall what I said, but it must have scared him enough because he broke down the door right away. I was crying and clutching my stomach on the floor when he got in. It was the scariest sight he had ever seen, he later informed me. Like some action hero, he picked me up and carried me out of there without even pausing to tell anyone what was happening. He called ahead to make sure they were prepared for us while driving insanely to the hospital. I hardly recall the drive. All of it was a haze of terror and misery. My next vivid memory is of Lily in my arms. After I woke up in the hospital, she was small and flawless, and I couldn't stop crying, overwhelmed by the fact that, in spite of everything, she was fine. Beside me sat Tom, who appeared to have survived a war. At that point, he informed me of what transpired following our departure. Margaret and Vanessa were already reciting their versions of what had happened at the wedding. Margaret claimed that I had overreacted and made myself the center of attention. She informed others that I had left because I couldn't cope with the stress, the heat, or whatever other absurdity she thought of at the moment. Naturally, Vanessa joined the chorus, accusing me of being self-centered for abandoning her on her special day. At first, Tom was the only one who seemed to dispute it. It didn't sit well with him. He returned to the location to confront them after confirming that Lily and I were safe. Margaret lost her temper when he insisted on knowing the truth. She tried to defend her decision to leave by saying she simply couldn't handle the stress, even though she acknowledged locking me in the bathroom. I was attempting to assist. Tom didn't believe it. Assist? He lost his temper. She was in labor when you locked her in a restroom. You put Lily's life at peril. What on earth is the matter with you? Margaret made an effort to act like the victim. I was at a loss for what to do. Vanessa's day was being safeguarded by Tom. Defending Vanessa, Tom yelled, "Instead of treating your family like trash, you should protect them." Margaret, you're dead to me. Neither Lily nor we will ever see you again. Never. Margaret continued, blatantly and guiltlessly acknowledging her own wrongdoing. I was attempting to keep Vanessa's wedding safe. It wasn't intimate. Not intimate. This woman treated me like a problem to be kept hidden while I was in labor. Tom went totally crazy. He assured Margaret that she would never see Lily or us again, and that she was dead to him. Vanessa attempted to speak up. She spoke in a sarcastic tone. Perhaps she should have stayed at home if she was that close to giving delivery. She was aware of the significance of this day to me. Tom didn't mince words. You find it important, he fired back. Despite being 9 months pregnant, she came to support you. How did you pay her back? By permitting your mother to confine her to a restroom during her labor. Are you even able to hear yourself? Vanessa rolled her eyes. It was a light-hearted affair. Tom snarled, not so serious. You also have the potential to have cost me my wife and daughter. I'm done with both of you because you're selfish mothers. Playing the victim, Margaret has been messaging constantly ever since. She repeatedly claims that she made a mistake and acted in accordance with her then best judgment. She wants our family to move on. Vanessa hasn't offered an apology. Rather, she has been publishing passive-aggressive content on the internet as if some people simply cannot bear to let others take their turn. Tom was enraged. He was trying to get Margaret charged with putting Lily's and my lives in jeopardy. To be honest, I'm beginning to believe he's correct. I mean, who thinks it's acceptable to lock a laboring pregnant woman in a bathroom? Vanessa spoke with Tom. She was supporting Margaret. She accused me of being attention-seeking by attending the wedding while pregnant, telling Tom that I was being too dramatic. In fact, she asked why she hadn't stayed at home if she was that close to giving birth, as if my labor and pregnancy were a personal assault on her. Tom claimed that what he was hearing was so unbelievable. Vanessa should feel embarrassed of herself for acting as though I had done something wrong, he said, adding that I had simply attended the wedding to support her. This was supposed to be my day, Vanessa muttered, rolling her eyes. It was wrecked by her. You're siding with her now, joining me. His wife is me. I was giving birth. How can this even be a debate? Then, Margaret began to cry, as if she were the victim. She kept saying things like, I never meant to injure anyone, and I didn't know what else to do. Tom bluntly told her that her justifications were irrelevant. Her actions were reckless, self-centered, and unacceptable. He said that she would never again be a part of Lily's life, and that she had permanently betrayed our trust. Tom did not end there. After his departure from the wedding, he made a report at the police station right away. He didn't want to put me under undue stress while I was healing, so he didn't even inform me about this till later. When I learned, I experienced a strange mixture of feelings, including anger that it had to come to this in the first place, and thankfulness that he had my back. His statement was taken by the police, but it's not a simple matter because no one was gravely hurt. Even then, we should think about filing a lawsuit because Margaret locked me in a bathroom when I was giving birth. No matter how long it takes or how nasty it becomes, Tom claims he doesn't care. He will not tolerate this. Tom and I have been making an effort to concentrate on Lily, but when Margaret and Vanessa are persistent, it's difficult to let go completely. Last week, Margaret even unexpectedly arrived at our house, knocked on the door, and insisted on seeing Lily. The door was not even opened by Tom. Using the surveillance camera, he just threatened to call the police if she didn't leave. She began screaming that Lily should get to meet her grandmother and that we were destroying the family. After she departed, Tom became enraged. To begin the process of obtaining a restraining order, he gave our attorney a call. I don't trust her around Lily right now, which seems ridiculous. If she can explain why she locked me in a restroom when I was in labor, what else could she be able to do? I'm still taking it all in. I feel like I'm in some kind of bizarre nightmare. The other aspect of me is simply exhausted. I'm fed up with Margaret and Vanessa's drama, entitlement, and utter lack of responsibility. I want to stop looking over my shoulder all the time and instead concentrate on Lily and our small family. However, I am aware that this is not the end of it. Neither Margaret nor Vanessa appear to be the type to meekly retreat, to make themselves appear like the victims. They will continue to push, guilt trip, and distort the facts. How far we will go to protect ourselves is, I suppose, the question now. Do we file charges? Do we fully cut them off? Although I'm leaning toward no contact, I don't want to take the blame for the family's dissolution. In any case, it no longer feels like much of a family. We are currently at that point. I'd love to know what you think, if you have any suggestions or have experienced something similar. Moreover, if you remain interested. For the upgrade or update 1 point, stay put. Hey, go back and read it again. I wish I could say that things were getting cooler, but they're not. This whole issue has been elevated to a new level by Margaret and Vanessa. These two won't let us have a moment of quiet, even though I've been trying to concentrate on Lily and savor these priceless newborn moments. I'll take you through the most recent. We hoped Margaret would get the hint and leave us alone after her visit at midnight. Obviously, I was mistaken. She sent us a package in the mail a few days later. I initially believed it to be a gift of apology, like a baby blanket or flowers. Not at all. It was an album of photographs, but not a sentimental or charming one. This was filled with photos from Vanessa's wedding, and on the pages were sticky notes that said things like, "What a beautiful day." It's unfortunate that some people were unable to appreciate it. I'm not sure whether I was more irate or perplexed. Who even does that? Margaret seemed to be making fun of us and trying to make it clear that she still thought the wedding was more significant than the fact that I had been locked in a bathroom during labor. I advised Tom to preserve the album as proof in case we needed it later, even though he wanted to throw it in the trash. Then the text messages arrived. With outrageous guilt trips, Margaret began bombarding Tom with statements like, "I gave you life, and this is how you repay me. Otherwise, after I'm gone, you'll regret offending your mother." She also included some strange, subliminal threats, such as "family is forever. No matter how hard you try, you can't get rid of me." Tom had had enough. He didn't even try to answer. Rather, he put her number on the block list and sent everything to our lawyer. Margaret wasn't finished though. Oh no. A few days later, she called from a different number, and she broke down in tears when Tom answered the phone. She pleaded with Tom for forgiveness, saying over and over again that she was losing her family. When that failed, she changed the course of events. She stopped crying and began screaming that I was the true issue. She claims that I have brainwashed Tom and made him hostile toward his own family. I was even accused of jealously watching Vanessa's wedding. I was envious of a wedding where I almost had my baby locked in a bathroom after going into labor. Naturally, Vanessa has been equally awful. Although she hasn't contacted me directly, she has been active on social media, posting cryptic quotes and passive-aggressive jabs about dishonest people and betrayal. "At least I know who really loves me," she wrote, as the caption for a wedding photo she shared online. Apparently, everyone in their circle is aware of what happened and believes Vanessa is insane, which is why Tom's friends have been sending us screenshots. "I lost it over one post in particular. Some people can't bear to let others have their turn," she wrote. "That probably says more about them than about me." Tom interrupted me before I could reply. He's probably right when he says that talking to her will simply give her the attention she wants. But it's so hard to stay quiet when she's out there rewriting history, like she's the victim. The line was crossed when Margaret tried to rope other family members into her mess. She called Tom's older brother, Andrew, and spun this sob story about how we're being cruel and cutting her out of our lives for no reason. Andrew called Tom all concerned and asked if we were okay when Tom explained the real story. Andrew was floored. He had no idea how bad things were and said he fully supports us going no contact. But Margaret didn't stop with Andrew. She started calling Tom's aunts, uncles, cousins, practically anyone who would listen, and gave them her warped version of events. She made it sound like I threw a tantrum at the wedding, stormed out, and then forced Tom to lose relations with his family. Some of them believed her, at least at first. We started getting texts from distant relatives asking, "What's going on with Margaret?" She seemed very distressed. Tom had to send everybody this enormous group text describing what truly transpired. He kept it short and to the point, stating, "For everyone who's heard Margaret's account of events, here's the truth. She locked my wife in a bathroom when she was in labor to safeguard Vanessa's wedding. We are no longer in communication with her for the safety of our family." Most people were sympathetic, but a few still sided with Margaret, saying things like, "She's your mom, though can't you work it out?" It's hard trying to defend ourselves over something that should be so blatantly wrong. At this point, Tom and I have chosen to go fully no contact with both Margaret and Vanessa. Additionally, we are proceeding with a restraining order against Margaret. I don't trust her not to escalate, even though it feels excessive. She has already shown that she is not concerned about Lily's or my safety, and I will not allow her to exploit guilt to get our daughter. Vanessa is hopeless. She hasn't shown regret or apologized, and it appears that she is more interested in playing the victim than taking responsibility for her actions. I'm done assuming anything about her or attempting to comprehend her. Some folks are simply not worth the trouble. It has been cathartic to write all of this out, but it also makes me realize how crazy the whole thing is. I can't stop wondering how we got here. I believe some individuals are so consumed by their own egos that they will harm others in order to preserve their image. But I never thought I'd be dealing with this kind of drama, especially with relatives. In any case, I appreciate you reading Reddit. I'd be interested in hearing any tips you may have for handling toxic family members or avoiding touch. I'll post an update if you're still interested. Scott, the last update. Reddit, hello. I appreciate your patience with me during this whole ordeal. After everything we've gone through, I genuinely didn't believe things could get much worse. However, Margaret and Vanessa have a remarkable talent for excavating even more. I believe that a turning moment has finally been reached. Or I'm hoping we have. Let me explain how it all transpired. Tom and I began establishing some boundaries to safeguard our family after resolving to completely stop communicating. We formally requested that Margaret be subject to a restraining order, given the messages, social media posts, and Tom's statement to the police. Our lawyer felt certain we had a strong case. Having to go through this legal process didn't excite me. It's not enjoyable, I assure you, but I knew it was essential. About a week ago, Margaret was served. She didn't say anything to us directly. The block list helped, but she instantly entered damage control mode, so we understood what had happened. Within hours, we received calls from a number of Tom's family who said we had gone too far and that Margaret was upset. "She's even your mother," according to one of her cousins. "Isn't that a bit harsh of you?" Tom's answer was ideal. "Feel free to contact Margaret if you believe that locking a laboring pregnant woman in a bathroom is acceptable," he said. "Otherwise, don't get involved." Most of them stopped talking after that, but some continued to make the case that family is crucial. It's funny how you only say that when you're not the victim of abuse. When Margaret made the decision to visit Tom's place of employment, the true drama began. Yes, you read correctly. In fact, she demanded to see him in his office. It is really embarrassing that Margaret would cause a scene in Tom's workplace, which is a somewhat professional setting. She began screaming in the lobby about how Tom was brainwashed. and that I was destroying the family. So security had to remove her out. When Tom learned, he became enraged. He reported the event to our lawyer right away, and we amended the restraining order to include his place of employment. I find it absurd that Margaret believed this to be a suitable solution. It only served to highlight the reasons we had to cut her off in the first place, if anything. However, Margaret wasn't finished yet. She outdid herself in the worst manner conceivable by filing for grandparent visitation rights just when we believed she had finally understood. Let me tell you what took place. Tom received a call from a lawyer. Not our lawyer, but their lawyer. A few weeks after we had the restraining order finalized and believed that their pandemonium was over, Margaret and Vanessa made the decision to attempt to apply for grandparent visitation rights. He informed us, given what Lily has done, Margaret genuinely feels she has the legal authority to impose herself on her. I initially believed it to be a joke. Who does this, for example? No. Though it was real. The documents state that Margaret was experiencing emotional suffering as a result of being wrongfully denied contact to her granddaughter. She portrayed herself as this devoted grandmother who was unjustly and cruelly removed from our lives. Vanessa even included a declaration in the lawsuit supporting Margaret's allegations that I was manipulating Tom and unstable. I was astounded by the boldness. This woman is attempting to portray herself as a victim, even though she confined me in a restroom during my delivery. It was mind-blowing how entitled they were. Fortunately, our lawyer was unfazed. Grandparents' rights claims are difficult to win, she informed us, particularly when the parents are married. Both of them are still living, and there is no history of abuse or neglect. Even though Margaret had nothing to stand on, it was nevertheless frustrating that she made an effort. She seemed to be striving to gain the title of most toxic person alive by treating the situation like a game. Despite our anger, Tom and I remained composed and let our attorney handle the situation. She submitted a letter detailing all of Margaret's actions, including pestering us at home and at work and locking me in the bathroom. Screenshots of Vanessa's social media posts, Margaret's communications, and even the police report were included. Margaret was in for a harsh surprise if she believed that this would be her big chance to appear like the good guy. Margaret and Vanessa arrived for the hearing, looking like they were trying out for a daytime drama. Margaret continued to wipe at her eyes while carrying Kleenex. Her voice wavered. "Your Honor," she said, "my granddaughter has been unjustly denied access to me. All I want is to share in her life. Family is sacred. Our attorney didn't keep anything sacred. Is that the same as locking a laboring pregnant lady in a restroom to keep a wedding safe? Do you express love that way?" Her voice was stern as she inquired. The judge's unreadable face turned to Margaret. "Have you done that?" Margaret stumbled. There was a miscommunication. I was attempting to. Enough." She was interrupted by the judge. "There is no excuse for putting a pregnant mother and her unborn child at danger. The visiting request has been turned down." When it was our turn, our attorney didn't mince words. She presented the facts in ruthless detail, highlighting how Margaret had locked me in a bathroom during my labor, putting both my life and my Lily's in jeopardy. She brought attention to the continuous harassment and the restraining order. The judge appeared prepared to eject Margaret from the courtroom. By the time she finished, the judge's deliberations took very little time. He immediately refused Margaret's plea, stating unequivocally that her actions were unacceptable. He even told her that there would be severe repercussions if she tried to harass or get in touch with us again. It's the fastest deflating I've ever seen. Without saying a word, Margaret and Vanessa bounded from the courtroom. Tom and I felt like we could finally breathe again after the hearing. I believe the humiliation of losing in court may have finally gotten through to Margaret and Vanessa, because they haven't gotten in touch with us since. We are at peace for the time being, but I can't say that they are permanently gone from our lives. It's difficult to comprehend how far they were prepared to go in order to exert control over our lives in retrospect. But if I've learned anything, It's that you must confront toxic people head-on, regardless of how hard they try to change the facts. I will stop at nothing to provide Lily with the happy, healthy environment she deserves to grow up in. I appreciate Reddit hearing my story and providing guidance during the process. I'm grateful to everyone who read and left comments. Writing this all out has been a strange form of therapy. Just remember that you're not alone and that you don't have to tolerate your own toxic family drama. Remain resilient, establish those limits, and keep your peace. I'm going to sign off now. Who knows though, if Vanessa or Margaret will try another prank. I may return with some new information. I hope it doesn't end out like that. Story 3. Your assistance is greatly appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now. Hello everyone. I'm a 28-year-old man named Kyle, and I've been putting this off for a while. It's about my family, and to be honest, I'm going crazy trying to find out if I'm at fault. This has been bothering me for too long, so I truly need an outside viewpoint. All right, let me explain. At my mom's house, Thanksgiving has always been a chaotic event. It's exhausting. Not the kind of warm and fuzzy kind you see in movies, when everyone laughs over overcooked turkey. Why have I returned here? The same thing happened every time. Similar to clockwork. The moment I parked my car in front, I knew what I was getting into. As usual, Mom's house had the same appearance. The shutters were misaligned, and the white paint was peeling, as if they were desperately clinging to the 1990s. But the house wasn't the point. Inside, it was the people, entering. Like a fighter entering a ring, I prepared myself. My first impression was one of pie and turkey, which was pleasant until Mom's voice interrupted. She was in the kitchen already, shouting at my younger sister Emily for bringing apple pie rather than pumpkin. Emily appeared to be regretting every decision that brought her to this point. She was holding the pie box tightly, as if it were a shield. Pumpkin, Emily, is no one listening to me anymore? I asked. Mom turned back to whatever she was burning on the stove and threw up her hands. Emily gave a shrug. The store possessed it. Mom mumbled, "Excuses, excuses," and slammed a pot on the counter. I considered slipping away before anyone saw me, but it was too late. Dad saw me first when he parked in his recliner. He was shouting like the players on TV were interested in his commentary while half watching the football game. "Look who made the decision to appear." Gruff as ever, he said. Before I could answer, my older brother Jake saw me. He had a sneer on his face and was leaning on the counter, holding a Coke in one hand. The prodigal son, Kyle, comes back, spreading his arms as if greeting a king or queen. He remarked, "What took place? Have you finally figured out how to return here using Google Maps?" "Jake, nice to see you too." As I placed the pie I had brought on the table, I spoke in a flat voice. Jake persisted, "I'm still riding alone. Man, no children. Bro, what's the plan? In search of a miracle." I ignored him, contrived a laugh, and went to the kitchen to greet my mother. She never even raised her gaze from the stove. "You're running late." As she said, she violently stirred something. "Traffic?" Despite having spent 20 minutes outside my car, getting ready to get in, I lied. Even though dinner wasn't served yet, I felt as though I had been there for hours. It had a way of drawing you into the whirlpool of Mom's house. It was like entering a time machine every Thanksgiving. Nothing was altered, not the scent of old carpet, not the mismatched furniture, and most certainly not the folks whose father was obsessed with the game. Jake, on the other hand, was going about his daily business as if he owned the place. The golden child was Jake. It has always been. He was the one who married young, had children like it was a pastime, and stayed close to home. In the meantime, I left home, found a respectable career in a different city, and reportedly ended up disappointing the family. "Hey, Kyle," from the living room, Jake called. "Are you still working at your desk job? How are you finding the corporate hamster wheel?" I said in a neutral tone. "It's fine. All right." He pretended to snort. "You had big dreams once, man. What became of that? We assumed you would be a hot shooter." I pretended to be intrigued by the bowl of chips on the counter and ignored him. It was simpler than interacting. At last, Emily came to the kitchen with me. She drooped. Looking over her shoulder, she murmured, "Mom's losing it. Since we were young, she has been losing it." Emily choked back a giggle as I mumbled back, "Why is Jake acting this way?" She inquired. "Tonight, he is on one. He is constantly on one." I rolled my eyes as I spoke. Being Mr. Perfect should keep him too busy to bother me, but it doesn't. Emily gave a shrug. "You don't live here, at least. You don't always have to cope with this." She was right. Only a few times a year did I have to endure this circus. She was still confined to the same town, doing 2 jobs, and somehow juggling her mother's incessant criticism. Pam shouted, "Where's the gravy, Emily?" interrupting us, as if the world were dying. With a groan, Emily left me alone once more and went to handle things. I wanted to know how long I would have to stay before leaving would be considered socially acceptable. Once more, Jake's words echoed from the living room. "You're going to spend the entire night in there, Kyle. Man, come be social. It's Thanksgiving." Interpretation: "I want to play with you in front of everyone, so come out here." I inhaled deeply before entering the living room. As if we were closest friends, Jake patted the couch seat next to him right away. "Hurry up, take a seat." He smiled as he spoke. "Describe your adventurous life to us." I sat, but I could see by the smile on his face that this was not going to work out. He then began to cross his arms and recline back. "Jake, still no girlfriend?" Dad interrupted, not taking my eyes off the game. "Get rid of him." Jake chuckled. "What? Just curious. Isn't everyone here family? No secrets." I tightened my fists in an attempt to remain composed. "No, Jake, no girlfriend." "I appreciate you asking," he said, shacker, in a sarcastic tone. "Perhaps you're being overly particular." Mom entered while using a towel to wipe her hands. "Dinner is prepared." Before Jake could speak another word, she made the announcement. I got up and thanked God for giving me a reason to leave, even if it was only for a short while. I knew better than to believe that the worst was past, even though dinner might have provided a brief relief. Jake wasn't finished, by no means. I also knew in my heart that this was more than simply him. It was the dynamics of the entire family and the unstated roles that we were all compelled to play. The golden boy, Jake. The black sheep is me. The underappreciated middle child is Emily. The ringmaster is Mom. It was draining. However, this was Mom's house for Thanksgiving. The same mess, just in a different year. It was like joining a battleground when seated at the dinner table. The weapons, however, were forks, cutlery, and persistent passive aggressiveness. It was a striking spread, yes. Other snacks surround Mom's turkey centerpiece. However, the tension was as high as when Emily unintentionally spilt sauce over Jake's wedding suit. Everyone took their designated seats as if they were allotted seats. Dad at the head of the table, silently dominating the room. Mom beside him, prepared to intervene with reprimands or guilt trips. Naturally, Jake sat across from me, and Emily and I filled in the rest of the seats. Jake was given lots of chances to poke fun at me because of the arrangement, and he didn't waste any time in getting started. Thus, "Kyle," he started eating like a bird while pausing in mid-air with his fork. "Or did you discover how to appreciate authentic food at last?" I reached for the green beans, ignoring him. "Looks great, Mom," I responded, attempting to change the subject. Mom couldn't resist adding her own little smile. "Kyle, you could do with a bit more on your plate. You appear slender. Do you currently eat enough?" "I'm all right," I said, merely attempting to maintain good health. Jake laughed. "Well, it's almost like you're wasting away. Some of us do work out, you know. Perhaps you ought to give it a shot sometime." Without looking up, I added, "Thanks for the advice, Jake." He smiled as though he had done me a favor and replied, "You're welcome." Emily attempted to change the subject. "How are the children doing, Jake?" Jake exulted with delight and remarked, "Oh, they're great. Brandon is the top player on his team, even though he just started playing soccer. He clearly has my genes. And Lily is the smartest person in her class." "That's fantastic. Emily responded with a courteous smile. I'm sure you're proud. Jake looked at me and said, Of course. However, Kyle, you are aware that not everyone is a good parent. I put down my fork and inhaled deeply. Yes, Jake, because it's obvious that you have everything worked out. With a referee-like wave of her fork, Mom stepped in. Let's not argue, boys. It's Thanksgiving. Jake said naively, We're just having a conversation, not fighting. Across the table, Emily gave me a look that said, Just let it go. As dinner continued, I picked up my food and gave a small nod. Subtle and not so subtle. The jabs continued. Jake mentioned how I failed a high school math test. Then I smashed Dad's favorite coffee mug by mistake. He seemed to have a mental file of all the errors I had ever made, all set to pull out in the worst of times. Okay, Kyle. Leaning back in his chair, Jake murmured, How does living alone feel? It must be pleasant. No obligations, no stress, and no one to answer to. You and your microwave meals alone. I gritted my teeth and forced a grin. In fact, it's fantastic. The quiet is pleasant to me. He laughed and said, Oh, I bet. You've always tended to be a lone wolf, or simply by yourself. When Dad did speak, it was in a rough voice. Enough, Jake. Give the boy some food. Jake raised his hands in a gesture of simulated submission. I'm kidding. Dad, calm down. Mom's head was shaking. Jake, you ought to treat your brother with more consideration. Her tone, however, was unconvinced. She was more concerned with preserving the appearance of harmony than she was with defending me. Jake was also aware of it. He simply smiled as he took another turkey bite. Bless Emily, made another attempt to guide the discussion. This year's stuffing is excellent, Mom. Have you made use of a new recipe? Mom became a little happier. In fact, I did. Last week, I saw it on television. More dots were used. Well, let's get started. Jake rolled his eyes and cut in. Mom's cooking advice. You ought to take notes, Kyle. You might be able to learn how to make something that isn't packaged. I looked up, finally losing patience. What's your problem, Jake? Seriously? You've been on my case all night. The table went silent. Even Dad looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. Jake, of course, just smirked. Relax, man, he said, like he's so innocent. I'm just having fun. Don't be so sensitive. That's your excuse. Every year, I shot back. It's not fun. It's just you being an ass. Kyle. Mom snapped her eyes wide. Language. Oh, come on, Jake said, laughing. Don't get your feelings hurt, little bro. It's Thanksgiving. Lighten up. I stared at him, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Emily looked down at her plate, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. Maybe if you spent less time criticizing everyone else. Silently, I said. You'd have something better to do. Jake's grin faltered, just for a second. Then he leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You want to talk about better things to do? Like what? Sitting alone in your apartment every night, watching reruns and pretending you're happy. Jake, stop, Emily said, her voice firm. But Jake wasn't done. You act like you're above all this, above us. But let's be real, Kyle. What have you done? That's so fantastic. What do you have to show for yourself? Enough, Dad yelled, slapping his hand on the table. Both of you sit down and shut up. The room went dead silent. Even Jake didn't dare say another word. I glanced at my plate, my hunger long gone. Mom grumbled something about dessert, standing to clear the dishes. I stayed quiet, my hands squeezed under the table. Jake smirked again, but this time there was something in his eyes, like he knew he'd pushed too far, but couldn't confess it. Even though there was stuffing and turkey on the table, all I could taste was bitterness. The evening was far from over when the dinner was finally over. We had just arrived to the couch when Jake began his routine, which had Kyle's best hits, with me at the center of every joke. He ruined dinner, but it wasn't enough. No, everyone else just went along with it, as if everything were normal, and he had to keep the show going. Hey, do you recall when Kyle flooded the garage while attempting to fix the lawnmower? Jake said, almost spilling his drink from laughter. Bro, what was the strategy there? Submerge the engine. Before I could reply, Mom interrupted. Oh, what a catastrophe. You've always been so awkward, Kyle. I advised you to give your father a call. You have to do it yourself, though. I was 16 when I said, it was only once, in a stern voice. Leaning back on the couch like he had just won a prize, Jake smiled. 16. Man, it doesn't matter. From day one, you have been making mistakes. Emily, who was seated in the armchair, said, Jake, you don't need to drag him any longer. Come on. Jake dragged himself over to her. Please, Kyle is doing well. He's aware that I'm kidding. Correct, little brother. I turned my attention to the TV and ignored him. Jake's voice was so loud that I couldn't hear a word of the old sitcom that was being aired. Mom entered from the kitchen with a platter of dessert and coffee. Okay, everybody, it's pie time. Please, let's attempt to be polite, civil. Jake raised an eyebrow in response. I'm always polite. Kyle is the one that finds jokes offensive. I'm not to fault for this. I finally looked at him and yelled, everyone just lets you get away with being a jerk all night. Kyle is really unfortunate. Wiping an invisible tear from his eye, Jake said in a sarcastic manner, the victim is always the one who suffers. Oh no, perhaps I wouldn't have as much material if you hadn't made things so simple. Jake, Mom said in a stern voice, that's sufficient. Jake wasn't finished though. He wasn't. What? I'm merely expressing what everyone is considering. You're the one who constantly cleans up after him. You see, Mom, to save him, how many times did you have to phone his landlord? Not to be overlooked is college. 2 semesters are over. Very impressive. Jake, really? Quit talking, Emily said, raising her voice. Don't start, Emily, please, Jake fired back. Nor are you a saint. You're still residing in your mother's basement at the age of 28. You're simply angry. We're all thinking the same thing, and I'm speaking it out loud. The basement is not where I live, Emily shouted. Her expression read, you are aware that it is only transitory. Yes, of course. Jake rolled his eyes as he spoke. Short term, similar to how Kyle's career is flourishing. I got to my feet. I balled my fists. For someone who spends their entire lives disparaging others, you have a lot to say. Jake, what's the matter? Do you simply enjoy being a jerk, or are you really that insecure? Jake's smile vanished. Take a look, Kyle. Avoid starting something you can't complete. Oh, don't worry, I said, taking a step forward. I'll be fine finishing it. After remaining silent for the majority of the evening, Dad finally said something. You two please take a seat. I'm tired of listening to this nonsense. For once, why don't you speak to him? I yelled and gestured to Jake. It's him who's making trouble. But you all just let him sit there. Don't include me in your nonsense. Dad glared at me as he spoke. Both of you are behaving like children. Jake gave a sour laugh. You see? Dad concurs as well. Kyle, you're the issue. What do you know? I said, raising my voice. Ignore this. Screw you and the entire family dynamic in which Jake is allowed to act like a king and the others are expected to accept it. Mom, how could you say that, Kyle? I gasped. How could I? I fired back. Why do you allow this to continue year after year? You make it possible for him. I'm done with it, and you all do. There was silence in the room. Emily even seemed to want to vanish into the couch. Jake simply sat there grinning as if he had won. I didn't care though, for the first time. Jake, you know what? My voice said. Now be steady. Nobody here is better than you. Simply put, you're noisy. That's all. And when your children grow up and begin to hate you as much as we all do, you might figure it out. Go to hell though, until then. After grabbing my coat, I made my way to the door. My mother shouted after me, "You're not going out like this, Kyle. Observe me." Slamming the door behind me, I said. For a minute, I sat in my car with trembling hands. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. Mom or Emily are probably attempting to persuade me to return. It was the first time I didn't even check. I thought I had finally expressed everything I needed to. Jake could spend as much time as he wished, sitting on his tiny throne. I was no longer going to be his target. However, while I sat there, I felt uneasy. Another thing was bothering me, a feeling that the evening was far from ended. Not quite yet. Jake came charging out of the home as the door exploded just before I turned on the automobile. Anger twisted his face. He strode across the driveway toward my car without even bothering to put on a coat. More out of reflex than anything else, I rolled down the window halfway. "What on earth is wrong with you?" he shouted. He could see his breath in the icy air. "My issue," I fired back. "It's you who has spent the entire night pushing buttons." He slammed his hand on my car's roof and yelled, "Oh, don't start that crap again. Do you really think you can just leave us to clean up the mess after you've had your little outburst?" "A mess?" I said with a sour laugh. "Jake, you are the only mess here. Everyone just lets you get away with being a self-centered jerk your entire life." Jake's eyes narrowed, and I briefly believed he was going to punch me. "You realize that you're a tremendous piece of work? Behaving as though you're so superior to the others. You know what, Kyle? You're a farce. A joke has always been preferable to a bully." With a snap, I opened the car door and got out. Even though my heart was racing in my ears, I had no intention of giving up. The tension between us was so great as we stood in the driveway. With his fists locked at his sides, Jake towered over me, regardless of whether he would swing or simply keep talking. I wasn't going to back down. I murmured in a calm, low voice, "Jake, go back inside. Leave me alone and return to your idyllic little existence." "Or what?" he remarked, taking a step forward. "Are you going to strike me? Proceed. Kyle, show off your toughness to everyone." I remained motionless. My hands, shaking with rage, were by my sides. However, I left them there. I refused to provide him with the gratification. "Horrible." Jake shook his head and spat. "You are incapable of defending yourself. It makes sense why no one respects you." That was it. I didn't even consider it. I threw out my hands and gave him a forceful chest thrust. He took a stumbling step back. His surprised gaze widened. "Man, what the devil." Regaining his equilibrium, he said, "You are no longer allowed to speak to me in such a manner." My voice trembled as I spoke. "I'm finished. Jake, you're done with your nonsense. This family is over. It's all finished." A grimace distorted Jake's face. "You believe that you are superior to me because you left. All you are is a coward. It has always been. It will always remain. Being a coward is preferable to being a bully." I fired back. "At least I can feel good about myself without tearing others down." We were distracted by the sound of the door opening. Emily went outdoors. She had a pallid face. "Stop it, guys," she said. "Simply stop. This is crazy." "Emily, don't get involved." Without even glancing at her, Jake yelled, "No, I will not remain out of it." Putting herself between us, she said, "Jake, you're behaving like a crazy person. You're not helping Kyle. You two need to mature." I stepped back. "This was not initiated by me, and it's not me who's fleeing." Jake fired back. Emily gave me a beseeching look. "Please just go back inside, Kyle. Let's solve this problem." I gave a head shake. "Emily, there's nothing to figure out. Jake has expressed his feelings for me rather clearly, and to be honest, I no longer give a damn." Jake interrupted her just as she appeared to be about to add something else. "Excellent. Proceed. No one is stopping you." Emily's shout startled us both. "Jake, for once in your life, quit talking." In the icy driveway, the three of us stood. The burden of hidden hatred and years of animosity that hangs between us. I turned to look at the home again. The door remained closed, but I half expected Mom or Dad to emerge. They had no intention of becoming involved. They didn't. The silence was finally broken by Jake. "Kyle, you leave immediately and don't bother to return. You are no longer a member of this family." "Excellent." I turned to face my car and said that, since I'd rather not be. I entered and shut the door. I drove away without turning around, but a pit formed in my gut as the house vanished from my rearview mirror. This was not the end of it. By no means. There was an impending event. I sensed it. It seemed like a blur on the way home. Every word Jake uttered kept repeating in my mind, which was spinning. Every insult, every arrogant glance. I ought to have felt liberated, severing connections with the harmful people at last. However, something continued to nag at me. A mixture of guilt, rage, and an unidentified emotion. My phone buzzed once more on the way back to my apartment. I grabbed it as I pulled over onto the shoulder. Emily's text message flashed on the screen. "You have to return, Emily. There's a problem. Please." My chest constricted. There's something to those two words. There's a problem. Caused anxiety. Emily was not one for hyperbole. If this is how she was texting me, it must have been serious. As the chilly air filtered in through the broken glass, I sat there for a while, holding on to the phone. My better sense begged me to keep driving and get away from all of the dysfunction. Emily's remarks, however, stuck with me. I let out a sigh, slammed the vehicle into gear, and pivoted. When I pulled back into the driveway, the house had a new appearance. The warm light that had before made fun of me now seemed strange, as if it didn't belong. I sensed a problem as soon as I got out of the car. The front door swung softly in the breeze, slightly open. I paused. There was nobody in the living room. The dinner plates remained on the table. The dessert remnants remained unaltered. There was a profound silence in place of the earlier chaos and hilarity. I cried out, my heart thumping in my chest. "Emily?" I didn't know how to respond. I walked around the house. The sound of my footfall echoed off the hardwood floor. It was dark in the kitchen. The refrigerator door was left open, and the only light was emanating from it. The chamber was filled with a slight buzz, but it was insufficient to break the eerie silence. I heard it at that point. From the rear of the house came a faint thud. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. I considered turning around and walking away for a moment. Then I recalled Emily's text, though. If I was needed by her, I had no intention of leaving her, never again. The corridor seemed longer than it ought to have been. I arrived at Dad's study door, where the commotion had originated. The low light leaking out from the slightly open door created odd shadows on the walls. Slowly, I pushed it open. Jake was standing by the desk inside. He was facing away from me. He had a picture frame in his hand. He had stiff shoulders. He bent his head. I thought he was crying for a second, but then I saw his face when he turned around. It was not melancholy. It was anger. "You returned." His voice was gravelly and low as he spoke. "You did, of course. It was not something you could ignore. What are you discussing?" My voice was tremulous as I asked, "Emily, where are you? Where are Dad and Mom?" Jake uttered a hollow laugh. "Not funny." He broke the glass as he slammed the picture frame onto the desk. "They have vanished. Now it's just us. What on earth are you discussing?" I stepped back and stated that. "Where has it disappeared to?" Jake remained silent. He took a step closer instead. He balled his fists. "You always believed that you were superior to me, did you not? You're flawless. The victim is always the one who suffers. Kyle, poor guy. That never occurred to me." With a quivering voice, I spoke. "Where are they, Jake? The reason this family is broken is because of you." His voice rose as he growled. "You with your superiority complex. You're always running away. The one who doesn't belong is you." Jake was insane. I didn't grow up with this brother. The person who enjoyed making fun of others, but never went too far to become completely insane. I had no idea how to fix the thing that had shattered in him. The tension was abruptly broken by a sound coming from upstairs. Jake's head turned quickly. Without thinking, his look changed from one of wrath to something deeper. He shouted after me as I rushed for the stairs, pushing past him. "Kyle, you dare not go up there." I didn't pay attention. I ascended 2 steps at a time, with the help of my legs. I can feel my heart thumping in my ears. Light was leaking out from behind one of the bedroom doors. I threw open the door and went toward it. Emily was sitting with her back against the bed on the floor inside. She gave me a look. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her face was pallid. "Kyle," she said softly. "He's gone crazy. What took place?" I knelt next to her and asked. The sound of Jake's voice burst from the corridor before she could respond. "Kyle, get out of there, right now." Jake emerged in the doorway, and I got up, placing myself between Emily and the door. Anger twisted his face. "Did she not send you a text?" he spat. "To be the hero, she had to drag you back here. Jake, you have to be the hero all the time. Hold on." My voice was solid as I said, "We can correct anything that's happening. Simply relax. Nothing needs to be fixed." He entered the room and screamed, "Kyle, this family is broken. You are to blame for the years it has been broken. Emily and you are continually banding together against me, making me the villain all the time. You weren't the villain." I spoke, attempting to maintain a steady tone. "That was all your own doing." Jake came at me, but this time I was prepared. I grabbed Emily's arm and pulled her to her feet, avoiding him. "Leave," I muttered. She also didn't think twice. In the corner of the room, I could see Mom and Dad. No one was shouting. They were taking their time tearing us apart. Like onlookers at a train catastrophe, they remained motionless. "Take action." Emily let out a scream. "He's going crazy." Mom, however, simply shook her head. Her hands were fluttering pointlessly, as if she was undecided about whether to step in or leave. Dad stood beside her, rigid. His mouth was clenched, his arms folded. He remained silent. "Mom, Dad, assist him." Emily yelled once more, but neither responded. At last, their mother whispered, "Emily, my brothers. They will resolve it. Get it straight," I had yelled, moving away from Jake. "Are you serious now? You're just standing there while he goes out of control. Quit shouting at your mom." At last, Dad spoke in a quick, low voice, akin to a child's rebuke. When Jake caught up, he could see the front door, snatching my arm and pulling me away. I whirled around and struck his jaw with my hand. More shocked than harmed, he staggered back, and I took the opportunity to push Emily in the direction of the door. "Proceed," now I yelled. After a brief moment of hesitation, she nodded and hurried outside. Jake bounced back fast. He attacked me once more, with a mask of rage on his face. But this time, I was prepared. Two brothers eventually tore into years of bitterness and anger in a frank, nasty, and desperate argument. But ultimately, winning wasn't the point. The goal was to live. Jake sagged against the wall and gave me a hateful look as I stood there panting heavily. I finally recognized him for who he truly was, a man shattered by his own resentment, angry at the world because he couldn't figure out how to change himself. "Jake, I'm done," I said in a firm but calm voice. "You are no longer able to harm me." I turned and left the room without saying anything else. I went to a diner with Emily. We moved into a booth in the corner, the subtle coffee odor that permeates the atmosphere. Softly, her voice shaking, she whispered, "I don't think I can go back there." "You must not," I answered. "There is nothing that you owe them. They are still parents." Her hands trembling over her coffee cup, she whispered, "No." I spoke aggressively. "Parents guard their children. They do not tolerate abuse or offer justifications for it." Doubt clouded her eyes. "Now what should we do?" "We removed them." Taking a steady sip of coffee, I said, "Totally. There is no other option." That evening, I blocked Jake. Next, Dad. Next, Mom. Their toxicity no longer weighed them down. A peculiar stillness took its place. Although severing relationships wasn't simple, it was the first step to independence. And I felt like I could finally go on for the first time. This is it for me. I'm not sure what you guys think. I've had enough of their bullshit.